Oregon Governor Tina Kotek now halfway through her first term. Only on Katu, my one-on-one interview with her on the state of the state and the challenges ahead. I spoke with Governor Kotek on February 12th in Salem. Governor Kotek, good to see you.
Nice to see you, Steve.
Yes, absolutely. Let's talk about, start at the federal level. Of course, lots happening there, as we know. Been a lot of confusion about the Trump administration's efforts to freeze federal funding for these states. Currently, court-ordered pause on the freeze right now. Are there any Oregon agencies unable to access their federal funds right now that you know of?
Yes, several. There's been a lot of confusion since day one when that all went into effect, and it's kind of changes day to day. My message to folks is these are Oregon tax dollars going to DC, coming back for things that we all agree are important. Hopefully they get this figured out. You know, there's always transition in new administration, but you need to be able to pay your bills and you need to expect on the dollars that have been, you know, promised to the state. So we're hoping that'll all get fixed. Oregon
relies on $38 billion federal funds, two-year budget, funds for things like health care, child care, domestic violence programs, law enforcement grants as well. What is your plan B if the funding freeze eventually goes into effect and all of a sudden you can't get those funds? What are you going to do?
Well, first of all, these funds are allocated by Congress. So I know the president has some goals. Congress approves the money, so Congress will be the ones who will take the money away. So want to see the Congress step in and say, here are our priorities now, and that will take some time. I think what we're monitoring, trying to understand what the guidance we're getting is. For me right now, we are continuing to do the business of the state, focusing on our priorities, and we will take it day by day with what the federal administration is trying to do.
Is there a program in Oregon that's more vulnerable right now under the funding freeze?
Well, I think the things that are most vulnerable where there is, frankly, a philosophical difference. Let's look at clean energy. Oregon is slated, like many states, to get millions and millions of dollars for new electric vehicle charging stations on our major highways through a program that was set up under the Biden administration. We are anticipating those dollars. Those have been put on hold. So those are some very specific things that I think are really just showing the difference between the previous administration and the current one.
I want to talk about immigration a little bit. Have you received any solid reports that ICE has or will show up in the state of Oregon?
Well, we've always had federal enforcement here in the state of Oregon. I know there has been some activity, but there was even before, we had a new president. I haven't seen any substantial uptick since then, but we're monitoring it.
Are you concerned about that?
What I'm concerned about is the federal government respecting and honoring what Oregonians want to do. We have had laws on the books since the 80s saying federal immigration enforcement is up to the federal government. Local law enforcement is going to focus on local community safety. In fact, in 2018, there was a ballot measure that reaffirmed that. 65% of Oregonians voted to say, we like the fact that local law enforcement deals with local issues, federal government works on immigration. So I want to make sure we don't lose that balance. I want to protect what we value here in Oregon. And our communities, if someone has committed a crime, that will be dealt with. But most people who are here, they just want to live their lives. They just want to be able to work and support their community. And that's what I want to focus on.
Well, you've said you'll uphold Oregon's sanctuary laws, of course. And have you heard anything from the Trump administration about this as far as the consequences for doing that?
We have had some indications that there are concerns from the new administration about states that have sanctuary laws, states that are committed to diversity, equity, and inclusion. What I'm doing right now is monitoring what we're hearing from the federal government. I don't think we've gotten specific guidance yet to know what we should be doing differently. But at the end of the day, we're Oregon. I think you have a good handle on what Oregonians want to do. And I'm focused on the things that they care about at the moment, which are cost of housing, making sure they can get mental health care, making sure our schools are better. That's where I'm spending my time while I'm also listening to see what's happening in DC.
Are you at all worried about what they'll do to these sanctuary states? There's been some rumors out there they're going to come after the mayors of the cities and the governors of these states. Does that concern you at all?
Well, there's a lot of things that have been said. I'm, by nature, very calm based on what the reality of my day is. And my day right now is getting up, working on the issues that I got elected on. Housing, behavioral health, schools, trying to find wildfire funding, trying to get a transportation package passed. That's where I'm spending my time. I really don't have the bandwidth to be worried, but I want to tell Oregonians that we are watching, we are listening, we're trying to understand what that could mean for Oregon and do what we can to protect what we believe in here. And I think it's a day-by-day type of situation.
Causing confusion, do you think, for the states?
A lot of confusion. Here's what I would say about that. And this is, I think, what you would hear from most business owners. We need stability and certainty. I think the unfortunate thing of what's happening in DC right now that's very troubling, a lot of uncertainty. Will we have funding? Who will be staffing federal agencies? How does that affect states like Oregon? We have a lot of federal land, for example. Are we going to have staffers in the agencies that manage our federal lands? This is a lot of uncertainty. Uncertainty, instability, it's never good. So I'm trying to say, let's keep doing what we're doing until we know otherwise.
Oregon House Republicans are proposing a bill right now that would allow law enforcement agencies in Oregon to work with federal authorities to identify and remove people convicted of violent felonies, Class A misdemeanors, felony sexual offenses. They say this is a survey coming from the Republicans, shows 69% of Oregonians support deporting undocumented immigrants who have been convicted of a crime. Would you support a change like this to Oregon sanctuary law?
Well, I think anyone can. I haven't seen the survey, so I can't comment on that. And I just mentioned earlier that in 2018, Oregon voters, when they had a choice, said we should have what has been on the books since the 80s, a sanctuary approach of saying local law enforcement deals with local law enforcement issues, federal immigration authorities enforce immigration laws. And I think that's where Oregonians are. They don't want a lot of intrusion in our state, and federal immigration authorities can do what they need to do.
So you won't support the Republicans' bill here?
I think it takes us away from keeping our community safe, because it's taking resources and time away from other local law enforcement issues, which for me are, going after folks who are dealing with fentanyl. That's not an immigration issue per se. That is a drug enforcement situation. What I get concerned about is, with all this rhetoric and potential challenges, we need all of our law enforcement agencies from the federal to the state level to be able to work together to take on the issues that are most pressing, like the distribution of fentanyl. So that's where I'm focusing. I don't think that's a good approach. We're doing just fine the way we are. Let's focus on the things that actually matter.
What's the impact on Oregon if undocumented immigrants leave this state?
Well, I've had this discussion directly with folks in the agricultural community. We're hearing from the construction industry. A lot of folks who live here in Oregon have lived here a long time, law-abiding citizens who have lived here, residents of Oregon, who live here, contribute to our economic growth in the ag sector, construction. This is creating a dampening effect on people's willingness to be out and doing their jobs. That's going to affect everyone economically at the end of the day.
I want to talk about reproductive health, gender-affirming care. Oregon has really doubled down on protecting reproductive health and gender-affirming care. Why is that important?
It's important because Oregonians truly believe that people should get care based on what is medically necessary and medically approved. And those discussions are between the provider and the individual who needs that, whether that's reproductive health care, gender-affirming care, or any type of health care. Voters here in the state have gone year after year when it's been up at the ballot saying, we want to protect the sanctity of the provider and patient relationship. And in our state, we have strong non-discrimination protections. Gender-affirming care is allowed and legal in the state of Oregon, and it's between the provider and the patient.
Do you think Oregonians are protected when it comes to these issues?
I do. I think they really understand the sanctity of the conversation between a doctor and their patient.
I want to talk about education. Big deal. Obviously, I know you're on top of this as well. You're asking lawmakers to increase spending in 3 areas, in fact: education, housing and homelessness, and mental health and addiction. I want to talk about education here. Tests referred to as the nation's report card show that the state's middle and elementary students are still way behind in reading and math. And I know other states around the country are seeing this as well. What is the plan to improve reading and math skills of the Oregon students right now?
Well, I'm not happy about the marks that we're getting, and I don't think anyone in Oregon is satisfied. That's why when I came in as governor, one of my top education priorities that we are making progress on is early literacy, making sure we can help our schools use more evidence-based tools, get more training for our educators to actually say we are teaching the science of reading in our elementary schools so we can get to better third grade reading benchmarks for all of our students. Because I think every child can read, and I think we need to give educators the tools they need to do a better job. I've been advocating for more resources for our K through 12 school districts, but I've been super clear about it. More money comes with a commitment to more accountability, transparency, and outcomes. So I'm going to be working on a bill. I am actually working on a bill now that we'll be putting out in a couple weeks that talks about what are we going to measure. Third grade reading, I think we have to add 8th grade math as something we're charting among all our districts, and making sure that if a school district is struggling, that they come and get the help they need. Not voluntarily, but required at some point, because no matter where you are in the state, every student should have the ability to be successful.
So have to be certain achievement goals met to get the funding? Is that what it would be?
Yes, we're working on that right now. Like, how do you compare districts to districts on those metrics? School attendance, third grade reading, 8th grade math, 9th grade completion, and of course graduation and 5-year graduation. Looking at those numbers saying, we have some districts in our state who are knocking it out of the park. We have others who are struggling. So I know in Oregon, based on the resources we have, people can be doing a better job. So our job is to set those markers and say, if you're missing the mark, we're going to be there helping you along the way. And at some point, we might have to take some of your money to actually get it directed in the right way.
Growing list of school districts with budget shortfalls right now, including Portland Public Schools. $40 million shortfall they have in the 2025-26 school year. Among the reasons given, rising costs, declining enrollment, and PERS, they say, is also playing a role. You are proposing changes to education funding. What are those changes?
As the largest funder of K-12 education, the state, and state tax dollars, we have to provide more stability and certainty. So I have a bill and have been working with folks to say, let's be clear how we calculate the base funding for our schools. So school districts can depend on that. And that was a commitment I made after the Portland Public Schools strike and got right to work on that. And what we're hearing from district leaders is, you're doing a better job of giving us a more accurate assessment of what we need. So that's in my budget. I'm hoping the legislature approves that. In addition to the extra money though, it is back to the accountability, the outcomes conversation as well. Look, our districts are working hard, and we have to see better outcomes for our students.
So that accountability is going to be a big issue for you when it comes to education, right?
Super important, yeah.
Your 2025-27 budget includes more than $11 billion for Oregon school districts. That's an increase of 11%, right? Where's that money going to come from to support that?
Well, right now, I put out a balanced budget. I think we can put that kind of number into our schools. I think we can fund our housing and homelessness issues. In fact, I think our budget's very solid. I've told legislators, it's a great starting point for you. It's focused on the priorities. We have the money. Let's stay the course, keep working on the things that matter. So I think we can get there.
You support from legislature on that, do you think, that much 11% increase?
There has been strong support from the legislature on getting to a number that people aren't debating anymore. For many years, it's always been, well, what is our base school funding? How do we come up with it? We spent a lot of time agreeing on a recalculation to say, this is what is a more stable, consistent number for our school districts. And legislators have been joining me in the conversation of accountability. They're like, we can support more money, but we have to get better outcomes. So they've been at the table on the accountability conversation, so I suspect we'll have good support in the legislature.
Are you satisfied with the transparency when it comes to how they spend the money?
Well, we're working on that. The Department of Education has been given resources and are starting to be more transparent in the numbers that we can share at the state level. Because you remember during some of the strikes, there was a lot of disagreement about what the money was and all that kind of thing. We have better tracking and transparency at the Department of Education. Because at the end of the day, parents who are sending their kids to school need to know what money is coming in and how it's being spent. I would argue we need more transparency. That's why I'm trying to link it back to, look, if you want local decision making in your districts by your local school boards, we can honor that. And we have to see the outcomes that actually show they know what they're doing. And I can say, like I said, some school districts have done this very well, and others are really struggling. And we have to help them get to a better spot.
I think you hear it, parents will say, boy, Portland's $40 million in the hole. Beaverton, $30 million. How is this happening in these school districts?
Well, some of this is, the aftermath of 5 years plus past the global pandemic, right? There was a lot of one-time money, some things were spent. So this is a budget recalibration year, I think, for a lot of school districts. So while they're doing that, one-time money has gone away from the federal government to help them with the pandemic. I'm stabilizing what we're doing from the state level with my recommended budget. And now we're having the conversation about, this isn't about money. There is not one system in any state, and certainly not in the state of Oregon, that's 100% funded at all the levels we'd like it to be. It's just not capable, right? Sometimes it's just really hard to get to all those numbers. But with the resources we do have, we have to maximize results. And that's what I've been focusing on.
A lot of talk about the Trump administration possibly eliminating the Federal Department of Education. Your thoughts on that, and how would it affect education as a whole in the state of Oregon?
Well, my biggest concern right off the bat is if they do that, what happens to the money that is flowing to Oregon tax dollars that are coming here? I'll give you an example. I don't think people realize that most of vocational rehabilitation in the Department of Human Services here in the state of Oregon is funded by federal dollars out of the Department of Education. Those are dollars to help people get skills to get back into the workplace. If those dollars immediately go away, I don't know how we fund vocational rehabilitation in this state. We have money coming into the state for Head Start, for Title I schools that need additional support. All of those dollars complement what we do at the state level. We cannot do without those dollars. So I don't want to have a big debate about the Department of Education. What I want to know is, what are you going to do with the dollars? So if that agency is going away, which, by the way, Congress has to approve, then what happens to the funding streams? I'm all about what happens here in Oregon, not so much what happens in D.C.
Do you think it's realistic that would happen? We hear a lot of things right now about the Department of Education going away.
Well, I do think that for many years, I think it's been a Republican interest to do away with the Department of Education. I've been around long enough. I think it's every 4 years you hear about the Department of Education. I am concerned about the money that agency manages to make sure Oregonians are still helped by those dollars, which are having good impact here in the state. That's where my focus is. But again, Congress is going to have to decide if they don't want a Department of Education. That's not something you can do by fiat.
What's in your proposed budget for housing and homelessness?
Well, there's a lot, because we still have a crisis. I've re-upped my homelessness state of emergency. We're in year 3, primarily because we need the flexibility that comes with that emergency, because sometimes things come up and I'm like, can we do this if we move a little money around? I want that flexibility. We're making progress, but we have to stay the course. Thousands of folks are being kept from homelessness. Folks are getting rehoused, but we are not out of the woods yet. Progress is happening, but we have to pay for it. So that's shelter, that's eviction prevention, that's rehousing money. It's money to build housing, more money for infrastructure to get new housing produced. Because if we don't build more housing, we're never going to get at the affordability issue. We need more supply. That will lower the cost of housing for everyone.
You set a production goal of 36,000 units built each year over the next 10 years. You're short of that, right? What's going on there? What's happening with that?
Yeah, we're only about halfway there right now. In fact, that number just got readjusted because our new economists, now that we have a statewide analysis, that's been adjusted, but it's still about 27,000 units per year that we need to be producing, and we're only halfway there. The challenge? Too much red tape, too much discussion, too much time. If you are developing housing, every month that you have to wait to turn dirt is money. It's cost. It adds to the cost of your construction, and that ultimately leads to the cost of the housing going up. We've got to streamline things. We now have a housing accountability and production office at the state that I put in place to actually work with local jurisdictions to say, can you do that quicker? Can you do that more simply so we can get more homes built?
Are you talking about the permitting process? Is that the red tape you're talking about?
Yeah. When I talk to developers and they're like, it takes me 24 months to get all my permits, that's 2 years. Why can't that be 9 months? What can we do with local government to help them? And I will say there are local jurisdictions, local government that are doing it really well. It's just not in Bend. Bend's fast-growing part of our state, one of the fastest-growing places in the country. They've had a huge housing supply problem. They're doing everything possible. You need help with a sewer line? We'll help you out. You didn't get your permit? We'll go quicker. You need some land? Here are some options. They are trying everything to build housing, and they're doing a great job. You contrast that with Portland. They've done some things to streamline their permitting, still too slow. And I've had that conversation with the new mayor, and he understands that's a problem, and he's working on it.
I want to talk about the new mayor here when it comes to addressing homelessness. Mayor Keith Wilson says the city can end unsheltered homelessness in 1 year by creating nighttime shelters. Do you agree that nighttime shelters are an important piece of ending homelessness?
I support where the mayor's trying to go. What I've said to him, and we're having great conversations, and we consider each other partners in this because as Portland goes, that's important for the rest of the state. What I've said to him is I'm particularly interested in the day shelters that are also part of his plan because someone might have a place to sleep at night, but we don't want folks on the streets. Wouldn't it be better if they're in a place where they can get connected to services during the daylight hours? He's also considering that as well. So he's talking about day shelters, he's talking about more nighttime shelters. It is the humane thing to attempt to do. I think the challenge is going to be, can we find the resources to help him do that?
I was going to say, do you think it's realistic? 1 year ending unsheltered homelessness in Portland.
If we don't try, if we don't have a North Star, we won't get there. Mayor Wilson has been completely focused. He is leaving no rock unturned to get this done. My job is to help him be realistic about what could be achievable on the money side of things. Maybe we get some more money from the state. We need all the counties to be pitching in. We need the city to be prioritizing it. It could be possible, and we should try.
Is it something that could be done statewide? I mean, do you look at that, say, what's being done in Portland when it comes to homelessness? Let's move this all across the state.
Well, the situation in Portland and Multnomah County is the number per capita of folks who are experiencing unsheltered homelessness is quite large. That was a problem before the pandemic. It was exacerbated by the pandemic. Much deeper hole to dig out of. But what I've seen in communities around the state, through partnership with the state and local government, they are making progress. Here in Salem, 5 years ago, they had almost no nighttime shelters. Now they have a navigation center. They have pod villages. They have transitional shelter in 3 converted motels. They have a complete continuum of care for folks who are experiencing unsheltered homelessness. And now what we're also experiencing is the back door. When someone is sheltered, have been stabilized because they've been outside for a long time, but now they're more stable because they've been living in a motel, we got to get them into housing. That means more housing has to be built. And Salem's doing that, right? So they're really trying to make sure someone has a place to go when they've left a shelter. Bend is doing it. Astoria, I was just out in Astoria, Clatsop County. They had 0 beds, shelter beds. They have, I can't remember the number, but they have full-blown shelters now. They have a place for folks to go to get stabilized into housing. Every part of the state is doing their part. Portland's catching up a little bit because their challenge is much bigger than other places, but you can do it. Be persistent, focus on the goals, focus on the numbers, and put the resources where you need it.
I want to talk about mental health and addiction. Oregon counties have been implementing deflection programs.
Yeah.
Can you talk about what kind of impact those programs are having in the counties that are now using them?
The initial numbers on deflection, I think, are promising. It's only been a few months of, a full operation. But when someone is connected with law enforcement and they're clearly struggling and it's only about, personal use, they are getting connected to treatment and referral. We are seeing those numbers go up. It's a much more effective way than to put somebody in jail right off the bat, which I know is what Oregonians want. But what we had under Measure 110 wasn't working. These deflection centers are showing much more progress in referring folks to the services they need. And again, happening all around the state. Now, not every county has fully operationalized this, but as we go into the next 2-year budget, we want every county to have access to these type of deflection services.
What else would you like to see done to help people with substance use disorders?
One of my big priorities, and it's in my budget as well, is really talking about more treatment capacity and the workforce that goes along with it. So when someone's ready, nothing is more heartbreaking when someone says, I'm ready to get sober, or I understand I'm in a serious mental health crisis and I need to be somewhere inpatient. They can't find something. So we now have a regional study at my direction that says by region, here are our gaps in treatment beds. We have about 465 beds in the pipeline for construction. My budget would fund another 350 beds by region. So that's inpatient care, both for mental health and substance abuse. So we got to build those. I have about $80 million in my budget for more capacity around the state. and we have to focus on the workforce. You can't open a new facility and then have no one to staff it. And that's a challenge. We have a behavioral health workforce crisis right now. And so $50 million in my budget to help get more folks into the pipeline to work, but also support the workers who are there now. It's a really tough job. Very tough.
Fentanyl crisis?
Yeah.
What progress is being made, or is any progress being made when it comes to that?
Well, as you know, I was an advocate for the fentanyl crisis, the emergency that we had, that we set up first 3 months of last year, which brought all the different players in Portland together, law enforcement, community providers, local government, to say, what can we do different to work together to address the fentanyl crisis? So we're seeing less use on the streets, we're seeing more referrals to treatment facilities, and holding folks accountable that are dealing. I have money in my budget for the Oregon State Police to go after the distribution of fentanyl. I think we're making progress, but frankly, we need to see less fentanyl coming into the country. That's all. It's an international issue as well. What
can we do in the state of Oregon to really stem the tide of that stuff?
Well, it is a national epidemic. We all know that. Very dangerous, addictive drug. Making sure people aren't dying, so making sure we can get to them before, making sure we have naloxone and other drugs available to counteract, overdose. But we have to get the fentanyl off the street down, right? I've been working with the Oregon State Police. They have been doing a tremendously good job of increasing their intervention, trying to stop, trafficking up and down I-5. I get reports on a weekly basis about traffic stops and where they're finding drugs. We have to keep at that. We have to disrupt what is an organized criminal effort to bring fentanyl into our state, and so I want to support the state police any way I can, and they work hand in hand with our federal partners. This is a national issue, so we have to work federal, state, local to keep the fentanyl off the street, while we're also helping people deal with the addiction issues they have.
So disruption is key here for these
Absolutely.
guys, right? And that's not being done enough, is it, at this point?
Not enough, but as you remember, I helped put Oregon State Police bike patrol down in downtown Portland to help with Portland police when they needed an extra set of hands. When you have people patrolling, they go away, right? When you have responsible law enforcement standing there saying, don't be dealing on our streets, so that helps a lot. We want to make this a less friendly place to deal drugs.
You want to increase spending in behavioral health?
Oh, absolutely.
Tell me about that.
Well, mental health and addiction, sometimes those are co-occurring issues. People both have mental health issues and addiction issues. Again, having the capacity so when someone needs care, they can get it, a workforce that will support it. But it's smaller things, not smaller in terms of importance, but maybe less expensive. Suicide prevention for youth. Our numbers are too high. There's $1 million in my budget for that. There's money in my budget for a hotline for ranchers and farmers to call when they are suffering. People in very isolated industries that take their lives, they need somewhere to call, right? So the agri-stress hotline is a priority for me. So those types of prevention and tools to help people when they're in crisis is also important.
I want to talk about wildfires, of course. We all watched what happened in California recently. And as you were watching that unfold, did you think that could happen in my state? And to a certain extent has at one point. Tell me what's going on to make this state better prepared for fire like that.
Well, I think we all had a remembrance of 2020, the Labor Day wildfires. If you remember how the fires burned through Talent down in Southern Oregon, it just wiped out thousands of homes. It can happen here. And we had our most expensive fire season last year. We didn't lose a lot of properties. We lost a couple lives, but it was very expensive, $350 million for that fire season. Couple things. We have to help our communities be more resilient. I want to see ongoing regular funding that helps communities prepare, harden their homes, their neighborhoods to prepare for these types of things. More work on making our forests more resilient, cleaning up the fuel on the ground that is causing some of these fires. Having the money to fight the fires, that we don't have to go beg and steal from the federal government. We need to have our own resources to fight the fires. My message to the legislature is you need regular ongoing funding. I call for it in my budget. There's a funding work group working on it. We need sustainable funding for fire. It is the new normal. This will happen here. We have to be prepared because what I have seen with my own eyes, When a community is prepared and have done some of the preparation work to make fire less prone to their landscape, it works. We have to support communities to do that.
And that's a bipartisan effort, isn't it?
Oh,
It seemed to be
absolutely
when it comes to
bipartisan.
wildfires?
Yes.
No pushback
I
on
like
that one.
bipartisan issues. Nonpartisan issues in my mind. Wildfire's a nonpartisan issue. Housing a nonpartisan issue. Behavioral health. We all agree on those things, which is why I spend most of my time talking about those things, because what Oregonians want right now are solutions to the problems we all think are there. Let's just work on those things.
I want to talk about ODOT right now. Transportation, one of the big issues that Oregon lawmakers are working on this legislative session. ODOT says it needs a big boost in funding. In fact, on their website, they say this, and this is a quote: ODOT has enough funding to keep state highway maintenance levels roughly stable until the middle of 2025. After that, in the absence of additional revenue or revenue reform, Oregonians will see a rapid decline in the safety, quality, and reliability of the transportation system. As you watch that, you go, holy mackerel, middle of 2025, that's right around the corner. And that's concerning for folks. What happened here?
I think it's been years here in the state focusing on bigger projects, but not focusing on the nuts and bolts of doing the maintenance and the repair work that we need to keep our current road system healthy and safe. Winter maintenance needs to get funded. And our last transportation package was 2017. Here we are in 2025, that money has run out. We didn't do it right. My message to the legislature, and I've heard this from other legislators, is let's focus on the basics. You must fund road maintenance. We must fund bridge programs, paving, winter maintenance. Let's fund those things first. Let's make sure we have the funds for it, and then we can talk about other things. And I think there's a lot of interest in doing that, because at the end of the day, the roads we do have to work, have to be safe.
You want to give ODOT an additional $1.75 billion, am I correct on that number?
My budget has $1.7 billion in there. That is the hole, that is the gap that we have to fund, that the legislature has to allocate money for to make sure we have a functioning Department of Transportation that we need across the state.
If lawmakers agree on a package to raise taxes and fees on drivers that would go to ODOT, would you support that?
Well, we have to have a functioning Department of Transportation. And what I will say is, I hear other people saying, well, we don't need new taxes, just take the money out of the general fund. And for those who, general fund is our most discretionary dollars. Those are the dollars that fund our schools, our healthcare system, our prisons. We don't have money in that pot. What we have done is said for the folks who use the facilities, you have to pay in to support the roads. We will have that conversation again, and the legislature has to put a package together, and I will support it.
Republicans say the first step should not be raising taxes. They say lawmakers should analyze the budget, make sure ODOT is focused on its core mission of maintaining roads and bridges. Are you confident in how ODOT manages the money given to it by the legislature?
I am always open for more accountability and transparency. I don't think we can say with 100% certainty that they have spent every penny well. But in general, their priorities are the right priorities. So I'll add any other accountability structures that folks think are warranted, but that does not change the discussion that we have to fund an agency to do our basics. My frustration with what I'm hearing from the Republicans right now is, well, they're just saving somewhere. I can tell you we're going to have to find the resources. And unless they're going to take it out of the schools, we have to have a conversation about fees.
Do you have confidence in ODOT leadership?
I think Chris Strickler is doing a very good job of being very honest about where our situation is. We can always improve. I'm focused on customer service, transparency, accountability. No debate about that. I will work with anyone, put some stuff on the table. This is what we have to do to make sure our agencies function better. But that does not hide the fact that we have a gap in funding for transportation in the state.
I want to talk about climate action now. You wrote on X on February 10th that you guarantee that climate action will continue in Oregon regardless of the federal landscape. What's on your agenda when it comes to climate for the state of Oregon?
Well, we have some very clear goals here. We need to be clean electricity by 2040. We have programs like the Clean Fuels Program that has lowered the carbon impact of the fuels that are used in the state. We have really good programs in place for energy efficiency, renewable energy. We're going to keep going straight ahead on those things. Now, I'd like to have more support from the federal government. We have some money coming in. I'd like more money to come in for electric chargers or other things. But absent that, we're going to keep pushing forward. Every state, including Oregon, has to stay the course on climate action. It is an existential threat to our state, to our country, to our world, and we have a proud tradition here in Oregon of doing that. I'm going to do everything I can, even if we don't have all the dollars coming from the federal government.
You're approaching the halfway mark of your administration now.
Yeah, do I look tired
Think
yet?
about that. You don't actually. Amazingly well. How would you describe the progress made to date?
I think we're making strong progress, consistent progress, but it's not where we need to be, right? I am never absolutely happy about anything. Any person living out on the streets is one too many for me. So even though I see the numbers improving for our unsheltered homelessness here in the state, I want every person off the street. So maybe I've set too high of a bar, but what I can say to folks is we are making progress. We have the numbers to show it. We have the commitment to show it. We have the coordination to show it. We have to stay the course. I think the hardest part in government sometimes is like, oh, we're done with that. We're good. No, we cannot move on from the core challenges of our state: housing, homelessness, behavioral health, and our schools. I'm kind of dull that way. I just want to keep talking about the same things because that's what Oregonians want to talk about.
At some point, I'm sure you're starting to think about a second term.
So people tell me, yeah.
This would be the perfect time to announce if you're going to run for a second term.
Well, here's what I would say. I will make that announcement at the right time.
This is the right time.
There you go. I am not going to leave a job undone. And I think when you get into a job like that, like this, you see the trajectory. These things take 2, 4, 6 years to finish. I'm going to stay the course.
So you're going to run again?
Well, I'll announce it at the right time.
What keeps you awake at night when it comes to this job? What keeps you staring at the ceiling going, oh, man, there's got to be something. Every job has that, right?
I think what keeps me awake at night are the stories from people. When I'm on the road or I'm visiting with folks and I hear the personal stories of what people are dealing with, it concerns me when people are hurting. We have a lot of people who are hurting, you know. I just had some friends who lost someone to suicide. It's always very powerful when you realize that people need help. And government can't solve all of those things, but I worry that we might miss something, that we might not do it right. So it's about talking to people in my office and across our agencies and across the state. It's like, please keep working harder. People need us to be successful in solving problems because it's a life or death issue for some folks.
Talk to Republicans about the possibility of another walkout at some point, and they say, you know, it's a tool in the toolbox. They hope not to do it. Are you concerned about that?
What I want to make sure is we all are honest about what we have to do together. I'll work with anybody. If people have a solution, put it on the table. If it's a Republican idea, a Democratic idea, I don't care. If you have a good idea, I'm going to work with you. What I don't appreciate is people walking away from the problem. I want people to stay, do their work, and be here.
What kind of bipartisanship have you seen, or have you seen any in this session?
Well, the session's pretty young, but you know, I've talked with Republican legislators who are very focused on housing. We're very much aligned. They tell me about their bills. I'm like, tell me more. Let's work on it. They like my bills. I like their bills. Housing is a very nonpartisan, bipartisan issue right now. I meet with local leaders all the time. I just had a meeting with Eastern Oregon County Commissioners, and we talked about things that matter to them. We have to continue to be engaged together. I see a lot of promise. Sometimes Salem can get a little in a silo. We get very focused on kind of the politics of the Capitol. But when you're outside of Salem or outside the Capitol, you see people who are like, we got this, we're working together. I don't care what your background is, we're trying to solve problems. I'd like to see a little bit more of that across the street.
I'm going to switch gears to sports a little bit, because sports right now are big in the Portland area.
Yeah.
WNBA, of course, coming.
Awesome.
Just announced a training facility out in Hillsborough.
For the Thorns and the new WNBA team.
Absolutely. And of course, there's Major League Baseball that people have talked about. Give me your thoughts on all that and what it would mean for the state of Oregon having all those folks playing.
Those kinds of sport franchises are really big for cities like the size of Portland. I think it's an indicator that we are turning the corner on Portland. We haven't solved every issue, but the fact that the owners of the Thorns are willing to commit to the WNBA team and build a facility and really promote women's sports says a lot about their confidence in the future of Portland and what it means to be in Oregon. So I completely agree with that confidence. More people are coming to downtown Portland. They're feeling safer. Crime is down. It's not completely fixed, but what I can tell people is keep the faith. We are turning a corner. Portland's getting better. And, maybe we'll have baseball and WNBA at the same time.
Are you a baseball fan too?
I am. I played Little League.
Wow.
And I played basketball. So I'm heaven. I'm like, this is great.
This is a big deal. Anything else you want to talk about before we go?
I think the message I would have for Oregonians right now is I know things are hard. The cost of living, I had to plunk down $6 for eggs the other day, for a dozen eggs. I was like, that's a lot of money. Yeah. And so I'm doing everything I can to make sure it's a level playing field, working on the cost of housing. We got to build more housing to fix that. Making sure that there's a level playing field when people are being protected as consumers, utility costs. I think that's a challenge for folks. I know it's a challenge for folks, and I'm focused on that as well because you've got to be able to make ends meet. Everyone knows I worked at Oregon Food Bank. I did anti-hunger work for years. You got to be able to pay your bills. So we got to focus on affordability. Governor
Tina Kotek, busy schedule. We appreciate your time very much. Thank you for spending so much time with us today.
You're welcome, Steve. Good to see you.